When headlines scream that Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, they frame an imminent apocalypse where global oil supplies vanish forever. But this narrative misses the strategic reality entirely. The closure threat is not a military blockade, it is a calculated game of economic poker designed to force sanctions relief. Today we read this move as strategy rather than a morality play. The panic in news cycles suggests that Tehran has achieved something militarily impossible, shutting down one of the world's busiest waterways against superior U.S. naval power without triggering an existential war they cannot win. The reality is far more nuanced and, for Iran, even more desperate. This is not about total control over the strait, but rather a high-stakes bluff intended to spike insurance costs and oil prices while keeping their own exports flowing. By threatening chaos, Tehran hopes to force Washington into lifting sanctions that have crippled their economy. To understand why this matters, we must look at the asymmetrical capabilities on display. While Iran has deployed drones, naval mines, and swarming small boats since April 2026 under the Trump administration, these tactics are tools for economic deterrence rather than a feasible full-scale blockade. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps lacks the strategic capacity to permanently deny passage against U.S. forces without risking regime collapse. A true closure would invite immediate military retaliation that Iran cannot survive. Therefore, the threat itself becomes the weapon, creating leverage through uncertainty rather than actual physical obstruction. The mechanics of this bluff rely on low-level harassment designed to make global trade expensive and risky. By mining waters or harassing tankers with small boats, Tehran forces shipping companies to pay massive insurance premiums for passing through the choke point. This strategy allows Iran to keep its own oil exports moving while leveraging the fact that roughly 1/4 of all global oil flows pass through these narrow waters. The goal is not to stop every ship, but to tax the market enough to force Western governments into policy concessions. Quick resource note: I keep a curated set of Amazon search links in the description for books, gear, and tools relevant to this channel's topics. Some are affiliate links, so I may earn a commission at no extra cost to you. Please consider supporting the channel by using those links if you find something useful. This dynamic explains why commercial reality looks so different from the headlines. Despite media narratives of a total closure, data shows how trade adapts to coercion rather than stopping entirely. Between April 17 and April 20, following a brief reopening announcement, only 13 tankers successfully transited the strait, despite hundreds being stranded previously. This selective disruption proves that Iran is targeting specific vessels or times to maximize pressure without triggering a total war response they would lose. The impact of this strategy extends beyond immediate oil prices into long-term market psychology. By creating uncertainty, Iran forces global markets to price in risk premiums, effectively taxing themselves to pressure Western governments into negotiations over the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, baseline for current talks. The conflict is not a test of military superiority, but a contest in political endurance, where Tehran believes they can endure economic pain longer than U.S. voters can tolerate a new war in the Middle East. Washington has responded not with escalation, but with a counter-blockade restricting maritime traffic to and from Iranian ports using Marines and Special Operations Forces. This creates an asymmetrical standoff where Iran bets on outlasting American political will for war while facing domestic pressure to resolve hostilities quickly. The U.S. strategy aims to hurt Tehran economically without triggering all-out conflict, forcing the regime to weigh its survival against the cost of continued isolation. The data reveals how global trade adapts to this coercion rather than stopping entirely. Over half of all successful transits since March 4 are operated by companies from just 4 countries, led primarily by China, highlighting how major powers navigate these dangers through state-backed shipping lines and diplomatic channels that smaller nations cannot access. This selective resilience shows that while the threat is real, its reach is limited to those without alternative routes or political leverage in Washington. Iran's approach relies on keeping their own oil exports flowing even as they harass competitors' vessels. This allows them to maintain revenue streams necessary for regime survival while inflicting enough pain on global markets to force a negotiation table that has remained closed since the collapse of previous diplomatic efforts. The strategy is designed to make the status quo more expensive than compromise, betting that the international community will eventually prioritize stability over sanctions enforcement. The counterpressure from Washington creates a dangerous equilibrium where both sides are locked in a standoff they cannot afford to break, but also cannot win through force alone. Tehran knows that any attempt at total closure would invite overwhelming military response while knowing their own economic fragility limits how long they can sustain the current level of tension without external relief. This explains why the threat remains a constant backdrop rather than an escalating crisis leading to open warfare. Ultimately, this situation is not about territory or ideological victory, but about survival and leverage in a system where oil flows determine global power dynamics. The closure narrative serves as a distraction from the real issue, whether Washington will concede on sanctions before Iranian economic collapse forces their hand regardless of diplomatic outcomes. The conflict remains a contest in political endurance rather than military superiority, with each side betting that the other's patience is thinner than reality allows. The stakes extend far beyond the Persian Gulf, affecting global energy security and alliance structures for years to come. As long as Iran believes they can leverage oil prices against U.S. domestic politics, the threat of closure will remain a viable tool in their strategic arsenal, regardless of actual naval capabilities or international condemnation. This is realpolitik in action, where incentives drive behavior more than moral outrage ever could. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I am a one-person team working hard to make each video better than the last. Subscribe if you found value. It is the best way to show support. Drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. See you in the next video.